Welcome back to another edition of Whiskey and a Map. Today is a special episode where we have again our friend James Michael Dorsey, and we're going to be talking to James about his new book, The Lagoon. Hi, James.
Good morning, Michael. Good to
Can you
be
give
back.
Great, it's good to see you again. Can you give us a brief overview of your new book, The Lagoon?
Actually, it's a memoir and it covers an awful lot of ground. It's comprehensive work on gray whales for people who know nothing about it. But the focus is about this mystical connection that's been there for 10,000 years between the whales and people in southern Baja, because there are hundreds of caves painted with images of whales where these people went 25 miles inland to hold religious ceremonies. So there's this strange connection between people and whales that's been going on all this time, and it still exists today.
Yeah, your book covers decades of your study, and I like to use the word relationship with these whales. What prompted you to write this book at this time?
It was such a unique experience. I realized what I have taken for normal, because I've been doing this for so long, is something most people would never even know exists. You don't think of whales as communicating with people, but I've come to know individual whales over the years, and I can identify them from their markings, and I believe they communicate with us in a very subtle way. We're just not able to break through yet and talk to them, but I think it's going to happen at some point. There's a lot of interspecies communication research going on right now regarding all of this.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. However, your story with the whales begins in Alaska and a change of a plans for wedding anniversary. Can you tell
Yeah.
us about that? How it all started?
Well, we were going to repeat our 25th wedding anniversary vows in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Uh, there was so much red tape, I got frustrated and I told off the vicar of Paris who fired me for my own wedding. And so we decided, well, let's do something really unusual. So we went on a long range sea kayaking trip. Knew nothing about kayaks, nothing about whales, just wanted to go have an adventure. And the first hour we were on the water, a pod of orcas came right up to us. And that did it for me. I was hooked. I couldn't believe these wild animals were there looking at me. And so that started it. I started educating myself, taking classes, and it evolved from there. A whale in British Columbia got me hooked on whales down in Mexico.
Well, it wasn't just any whale; it was what they call a killer whale,
A
an
killer
orca,
whale. Yeah,
and you're
yeah.
and you're sitting there on the ocean, floating in a small plastic kayak,
And all I knew
and
at the time was that they eat flesh. I didn't realize that some only eats fish and others eat mammals, and all that is what I've learned over the years. But yeah, that was a life-altering moment.
the stories and your encounters with the whales occurs mostly in Baja and a place you call the Lagoon. Can you describe first the area of Baja where this happens and the landscape and the people?
It's about three-quarters of the way down Baja on the Pacific side. There are three great lagoons in Mexico that have high salt content, and that's why they are birth lagoons and sanctuaries where these whales migrate to every year. And the interesting thing is these three lagoons are the only places on Earth where wild animals in their natural habitat routinely seek human touch. These same animals on the open ocean will not come up to a boat, but in the lagoon, they know they're safe and they come to us. And we've been doing this since before recorded history now. I mean, as long as there have been people there, the whales have been coming to them.
In your book, you describe a number of interesting people, and you describe some folks there that you call the mountain people. Who are they?
They are descendants of the original people who were called the Cochimi, who inhabited central Baja as long as 10,000 years ago. And they are the ones that left these caves painted with images of whales. Their descendants have stayed in the mountains. Some of them have moved down to the water. The people in the lagoon where I've worked for 22 years are descendants of these same people. And like during the Spanish conquistador period, mainland Mexico was conquered by Spain, but they never conquered Baja because of these people were so rugged and individual and guerrilla fighters when it came down to defending their land. And life in the mountains in central Baja is the way things were 200 and 300 years ago. It's full of real cowboys who carry six shooters and they have their Winchester 74s and their scabbards and they wear leather chaps. They're the real thing. And these are the guys who take you into the mountains to see these caves, and they're very proud of the fact that their ancestors were the ones that left them to us.
You find a lot of significance in these cave paintings, and they seem to be quite a distance and arduous trek from the actual beach and the ocean. What is describe these cave paintings and why you think they're so significant?
Well, they're 25 miles inland from the lagoon, and while there are almost 400 painted caves throughout the Baja Peninsula, only the ones directly inland from the lagoon have whales in them. That's significant. Why did these people 10,000 years ago, they would have been very primitive people at that point by our standards. They had to walk all that way. They had to climb 2,000 feet up shale. Most of these mountains have very loose shale size contours. And we know from the fires inside and artifacts that have been found besides the paintings that they were holding religious ceremonies there. There was some connection to these animals, not necessarily that they were deities, but if you find these caves around the world, usually hunters would put images of the animals they want to kill uh, to take their power from them. But for the whales, I don't see how people 10,000 years ago could have killed them with spears and bows and arrows. It tells me it was more a religious experience than a hunting experience. And that's what most anthropologists and archaeologists think today.
Do the local people have any theories as to their ancestors in these cave paintings?
Well, they know they know they are descended from them. The reverence the local people in this lagoon have for these animals is astonishing. They treat them as family members. They talk to them like normal people, and the whales respond to these people. There's a connection there that cannot be denied, and it's hard to put it into words unless you're actually there and see it. But you have a 40-ton wild animal come up to a 20-foot boat and stick its head out of the water and look at you eye to eye from a foot away. That's a communication. And that's what goes on in this lagoon.
Now, man and whales have not always had a good relationship. In fact, you go into in your book a lot about the whaling and the devastation that that caused. There was one fascinating story, though, that you told that occurred in 1820 with a ship called the Essex.
Yes.
Can you tell us that story?
Well, for over 100 years, that was the only recorded attack by a whale on a boat. The Essex sailed out of Nantucket. They were hunting off the coast of Argentina because on those days, these whalers went out for 3 or 4 years at a time. They harpooned a sperm whale, and its cries of distress brought a larger sperm whale. And the crew later said that this was the biggest sperm whale they'd ever seen. There's no way of knowing that or not. They said the whale was 85 feet long, which would have been a gigantic sperm whale. But it came to the aid of its friend who was crying, and it deliberately rammed the Essex with its head and rammed it repeatedly until his head split open and the boat sank along with the whale. And the crew of the Essex spent months in a lifeboat. And the first mate, Owen Chase was his name, wrote the book called The Wreck of the Whale Ship Essex, and it's still in print. And it tells the true story of this attack by a whale. Now, that nothing like that had happened since until this recent thing of orcas ramming boats. And it's not actually an attack on people, but it's the closest thing to an attack that's happened in more than 100 years.
And of course, that brings up the idea of the Moby Dick in the story that was written.
Owen Chase's son had a copy of his father's book. He knew Herman Melville's son. Melville at the time was a writer, but he'd only published a few articles in adventure magazines. He was not famous by any means. He got a copy of Owen Chase's manuscript, and in time, that's what became the novel Moby Dick. It was based on Owen Chase's book. Ironically, he couldn't get that book published in America. Nobody was interested in it. It got published in England. They only printed 100 copies and they didn't sell. So the publisher shipped them back to Melville in the States, and he basically died without being well known. He gained fame long after his death. Now Moby Dick is considered an American classic. But it all started with that whaling ship off the coast of Argentina in, I think, 1823.
Now, some species of whales have almost been hunted to extinction, but some of them are coming back. But I like to fast forward now to the lagoon and the start of, or maybe a rediscovery of that relationship down in Baja with the whales. And there was an individual, Pacheco, and his story. Can you tell us that one?
Yeah, it was 1972. Well, first of all, at that time, gray whales were called devilfish because when whalers would harpoon them, they would fight. They would use their tails like hammers and they would fight back. And this started with Charles Scammons back in 1859, I think, when he first discovered the lagoon and started slaughtering whales. And they would harpoon a baby whale so its cries of distress would bring the mother in close where they could kill her. They wanted her for her oil and for her. Nobody ate whale. They wanted the blubber to render it for oil to burn in lamps. And they wanted the bones to make ladies' corsets and umbrella handles. That's the only reason they were killing these animals. Nobody ate the blubber. So anyway, that went on for 100 years. They were called devilfish because of this. And in 1972, this Mexican fisherman named Pacheco Mayoral had a whale rubbing on his boat while he was out fishing in the lagoon. Now, he was always aware of the whales and he thought they were dangerous, but since the whales never attacked in the lagoon because no one was attacking them. But Pacheco was still afraid. And when this whale would not stop rubbing on his boat, he said he didn't know why, but he reached over and he touched the whale. And he said the whale pressed against his hand. And that had never happened before. He went home that night. He told his wife, he told his family that he had petted a devilfish and nobody believed him. So he took him out on the water the next day and his wife touched the devilfish. And this spread quickly. The word got out that, you know what, maybe these animals have always been friendly and we were just too busy killing them to realize that. Anyway, they were on the verge of extinction until 1972. That's what really started a whole lot of stuff. Like the Marine Mammal Protection Act came out of this and all sorts of other legislation. But most people credit Pacheco Mayoral as the godfather of modern whale watching. He lived in the lagoon his whole life. He died 2-3 years ago, I believe. His family still runs a whale operation there. And he's a revered man in the lagoon.
And the folks there have kept up that growing relationship with the with the whales. There was an individual down there by the name of Cuco who described a couple of interesting observations about whale behavior. One he called crowd behavior, and also something about spy hopping. What are those? What's
Yeah,
that?
I think Cuco knows more about whales than anybody I've ever met. And spy hopping is when the whale sticks its head out of the water and turns to see what's around it because the eyes of a gray whale face down and out. So to know what's close by or even far away, they have to spy hop, it's called, stick their head out and rotate so they can see what's around them. If it's shallow enough, they'll stand on their tail on the bottom to do this. And that's spy hopping.
That's going to be quite a sight to see something that large reaching out and spinning to take a look at what's around. Kuko also described crowd behavior. What
Oh,
is that?
yeah. He has this theory that when one whale does a particular behavior, all the whales around it will imitate it. And I've seen this happen. You go out one day and a whale will spy hop, and all of a sudden it looks like there are dozens of whales spy hopping. Other days it might be a whale breaching, and suddenly they're all breaching. One whale comes up to the boat, another whale comes up, and before you know it, they're pushing each other the way to try and get your attention on them. It's crowd behavior, as he calls it, and I've seen it happen.
Your encounters with these whales, um, I think, began with the rescue of a baby whale on a sandbar. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it was stranded. These whales nurse for about 8 months, and they're only like 12 feet long when they're born. We call them pickles because that's what they look like. And occasionally, just like a human baby, they're rambunctious. They take off on their own. And this one got into water too shallow to get out of. And certainly its mother couldn't get to it. She was a couple hundred yards out in deeper water. And the fishermen knew what was going on. So I only went along. I was brand new at that point. I didn't really know what was happening. But these two guys were getting into a boat to go out to this whale because it was only like 3 feet deep or something there. And when they got there, they threw a wet blanket over its head. And the one fisherman put his arms around the whale and started talking to it. And the baby calmed down. And the other one slipped a rope around its tail flukes, and they were able to pull it out in deeper water where its mother was waiting. And that's the one time that I was able to witness this. It was fantastic.
Well, it had quite an impact on you. How'd you feel as you saw the interaction between this fisherman and the baby whale when he was talking to it?
That was the first time I realized that the people in the lagoon think of these animals as family. And I've come to believe that to this day. Like I said, I've come to know individual whales because they return to the same lagoon they were born in every year. And you get to know these animals. You can identify them from prop strikes and scarring and their coloration patterns. And to me, individual whales are almost like friends. And the people down there treat them that way.
It seems that the interaction between people and whales down there, it's a lot of it is about the touch. And you describe that a lot. Describe the first time that you touched one of these whales.
I cried the first time I touched one. Yeah. It we are so fragile when you think about us next to these animals. A full-grown gray whale is 45 feet long and can weigh 40 tons. They could easily splinter our boats, which are only 20 feet long and they're open boats. They come up to us and they want to be petted. Now, these animals are known to rub on boats. I think it's just the sensation they love because they have no arms, they have no fingers, they have no feet. But to rub on things, they get rid of barnacles and it just feels good. Some people think that's why they breach. We don't know. I think they breach because it's fun. But the sensation of touch there is unique. They don't get this anywhere else because they don't approach boats on the open ocean. And unique to gray whales in particular, out of all the different species of whales, these are the only ones who come up with their mouths open because they want to have their tongue scratched and they want to have their baleen stroked. They enjoy that. And there's a few photos in my book. I also have an AV presentation I've been doing lately that shows people doing this, scratching whales' tongues and stroking their baleen. And the whales just stay there with a big smile on their face, loving this contact. They're the
What was
only whales that do that.
what was your sensation when you touched that whale?
It felt like tight plastic that gave a little bit because there's a huge layer of blubber under that skin. It was very smooth, very slick, except for the barnacles. They get a lot of barnacles because they are the slowest swimming of all whales, so they collect a lot of barnacles. But yeah, that first touch, I can still feel it in my fingertips when I think about it. That's along with that first contact with an orca in British Columbia. That's a moment that you never forget. And I've had so many people who've gone down there and told me that same thing, that moment they touched that whale was a life-defining moment.
There was one particular whale that you, over the years, come to have a relationship with, and I believe you nicknamed him Cyclops.
Well, Cyclops had one eye. Yeah. The gray whales are the only bottom feeding whales. So they go along the bottom on one side. We know they're right or left sided, like we're right or left handed, because necropsies on dead whales have shown the baleen on one side of their mouth is worn down on the side they would feed on. They would go along the bottom with their mouths open through the sand, sucking up tons of silt and sand and water and the krill and amphipods inside. That's how they feed. And that gets trapped on the back of their baleen, and they push the water out with their tongue. And then they lick off the krill and the amphipods with their tongue, and that's how they feed. So we know that these animals are right or left sided. And also the thing about feeding on one side like that, rubbing so many years in the sand, they usually go blind in that eye from rubbing in the sand. And that's what happened with Cyclops. She had an opaque eye, and the baleen on one side of her mouth was worn down, and that gave her a funny bite, made her look very strange. But she was ancient. These whales can live 70 years. I think she was probably closer to 80. We know one whale made it to 90. And that's what I think happened with Cyclops. She was a mass of scars from shark attacks and prop strikes. She was a survivor.
And tell us about some of the encounters you had with Cyclops.
She would come up to the boat and raise her head 6 feet out of the water and just kind of lean it against the boat. Now, if she put all of her weight on it, she would flip us right over. But she was so gentle, she would just be there like a dog wanting to be petted. And I would talk to her and I would stroke her and I should say, I keep saying her because there's very few males that go into the lagoon. These are mostly mothers tending to their newborns, and the males tend to stay outside of the lagoon, except for juveniles. The juvenile males like to come in like young punks and run around in gangs.
Over the years, she kept returning to you.
Yes, at least 3 years. I know she was there. After that, I lost her somehow. She may have died or was just there at a different time than I was, because I don't have time to spend the entire season there. I go back and forth whenever I can. But I've come to know many whales like that, individual whales.
Did you get any sense that they recognized you as an individual?
I think they do. I really do, especially with Kuko. I have seen so many whales come to Kuko when they're not going to any other boat. It's like, I call it whale magic. He has this charisma. There's some kind of a connection some people give off. The fellow who runs the camp, owns the camp, Maldo Fisher, he's got whale magic. Everybody wants to be in Maldo's boat because when you go out, the whales come to Maldo, and he talks to them like you would talk to your favorite dog. They're his friends, and that's what it is with Kuko.
Now, you're a trained naturalist. So, what are your theories about how this relationship is evolving and why the connection?
The oceans are changing, um, and I think the whales know what's going on. Personally, I think the ocean is slowly dying. The Arctic waters where they feed in the wintertime, I mean the summertime, the temperature there is elevated 10 degrees right now. And that means amphipods and krill are going to die off. Whales are going to have to swim further to eat. They're going to have to migrate further to get to their birth lagoons. They have to migrate because they feed in the summer in these rich seas up near Chukchi and Bering Sea, north of Alaska. That's where all the food is. But they can't bear their young there because the baby whales are born without a layer of blubber, and they would freeze to death very quickly if they were born there. That's why they have to migrate south to warmer waters. And that's what that's all about, why they migrate. It's the second longest aquatic migration on Earth. Only humpbacks swim further. So the total migration route of the gray whale is about 14,000 miles round trip. And they're doing this constantly every year, back and forth.
What is it that you want people to take away from your book after they read it?
I'd like them to realize how fragile these creatures are, how precious they are.
Well, you are to be congratulated because it's a good read. It, if I understand, is one of the significant books on whales to come out in a long time. And my understanding is doing quite well out there commercially also. So congratulations. Any final thoughts?
Thank you. I'm sorry, the last one?
Any
Last
fi-
question?
yeah, any final thoughts?
Final thought? Yeah, if you can, read the book, because if you read the book, you'll go to Mexico. You won't have any choice. Uh, and if you go there, it will change your life. It's one thing to go on a whale watching boat off the coast of the Western United States. You might see the back of a whale, or you might see a fluke, but only down in those lagoons in Mexico are you going to go out on the water and have a whale come right up to you, look you in the eye, and want to be petted. And that will change your life. So no matter what you do in this earth, that is something everybody ought to do at least once.
And have that same experience, that same gleam that you have in your eye. Excellent. Well, good on you. It's a good read, and it's a fascinating subject when you really start digging deep into the relationships that can actually build between man and whale, especially after so much tragic history that maybe we have a new history that we can make with them.
We've we have hunted these animals to on the verge of extinction twice now, and they have come back both times. There seems to be an international movement that is accepting these animals as fellow sentient beings, and as that movement spreads around the world, hopefully commercial whaling will stop completely, because there's no reason on earth to eat these animals. There are other food sources that are available without having to kill intelligent, loving creatures in order to eat them.
Yeah, that's a sad commentary on those folks that are doing it. James Michael Dorsey, it's been a pleasure again to speak with you. And again, congratulations on your book.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Michael. Thank you for having me back.
Always. All right. We'll see you down the road.